Lantern in the t-shirt said Virginia is for lovers. Had a Bible in his left hand and a bottle in the other. He said all you've really given is affection in your flame. We both started laughing when the sky started to rain. Been a long, long road. We got a long, long way to go. Scared to leave, scared to die. Waiting perfect, but we tried. All right, jamming with Myers. Yeah, good old Kenny Chesney, or as his friends call him, K-Ches. Today we're going to be, for today's lecture, we're going to be talking about the Enlightenment. This should be, for the most part, review for you guys from middle school. Just a little refresher, and we're going to apply this to really our class in U.S. history, because the Enlightenment's going to play a vital, vital, vital role in U.S. history and the founding of our country, inspiration for the revolution against Great Britain, and ultimately will lead to our independence and kind of where we're at today. But a lot of that stems from this time period and these people that thought differently, that were seen as rebels or maybe even as traitors, as their, to their countrymen. So today we go into that. All right. So again, Enlightenment. So we need to know by the end of the day what that is, the who's, the what's, the where's, all that good stuff. All right. So the next couple of weeks, we're starting our, our unit on early U.S. documents, and that really starts with the Enlightenment. Find out how the Enlightenment, how these documents were impacted by the Enlightenment. So the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, U.S. Constitution, Northwest Ordinance, Bill of Rights. How did the Enlightenment impact really those sacred documents to our country? And then find out, which Enlightenment thinkers, there was individuals that really you'll find a lot of their concepts within those documents, as we'll show some examples of that through our primary sources. All right. So what is it? What is the Enlightenment? The Enlightenment is a time period in the 17 and 1800s where individuals are going to begin to use science and math and experience to really start to question and challenge authority of traditional ways of doing things. Now, who was the authority during these times? Think back to your world history class, 15, 16, 1700s. The church. The church had so much power, and the kings had so much power over their country at that point. And really, the authority came from the church. They felt like they had the divine right by God to basically say to all the thousands or 100,000 people who lived there, hey, this is what you need to believe. Don't ask questions. Just, we said it. God said it through us, so therefore you need to believe it. Well, as time began moving on, there was a lot of skepticism. A lot of people, why should we believe them? Is there proof? Is there evidence for why we're being oppressed? Why are we being thrown in jail for believing something different? Or, I'm not sure if this works a certain way. Is the sun is the earth really the center of the universe? Or is it the sun? Or is it another planet? So people began to question these things about the church and about the kings and what they're teaching. So that's really all the Enlightenment is, that they're enlightened. They want to find truth. They want to find evidence to support their truths. They didn't want to rely on just the church or the king to have their truth be told to them. So as you see by this chart at the bottom, their goals down here, they wanted to apply reason to human nature. Why do humans act the way they do? They wanted to use reason and scientific evidence to support that. They wanted to focus on individualism, to be different, think differently, challenge. They wanted freedom. They wanted change, ultimately. They wanted the power to be taken from the church, separation of church and state. They want to combine logic and reason, and they wanted, as I said, they wanted to weaken the church and weaken these absolute rulers, these kings and queens that have all the power. So again, you see this little chart here, again, kind of highlighting a lot of that, becoming illuminated. They wanted to challenge absolutism and divine right of the church. They wanted to question the government. They wanted to solve human problems by, again, using experimentation and science to prove variety of human nature and whatnot. All right, so when and where did it begin? What are we talking about here? So 1650s to really the early 1800s. That's really the time period of the Enlightenment, and we're talking about a lot of these Enlightenment thinkers during this time. It began in Europe, but as you see this chart down here, a lot of their ideas, their books, their essays Or as more Europeans began moving from Europe to America in the 16 and 1700s, they take a lot of those ideas with them. Again, through the essays, they transport them there. The colonists will begin reading these things. So that's where the Enlightenment ideas are going to start in Europe. They're going to start spreading all across the world, but specifically America. Hence, the American Revolution. Yes. All right, so why does it matter? Why are we learning about this? Why is it important? Ultimately, it's going to change the way people thought about nature, the world, other people, God, the government. Again, all those documents, as I said, are going to be highlighted in that. So think about today. Think about some is it popular to challenge authority? Think about that. Like, think about today and all these different things. You have, the protests, for instance. You have, in the past several months about, the police and African Americans, Black Lives Matter, have been all over the country. You have citizens that are toppling down and protesting against statues of Confederate soldiers and Confederates, down south, and how they're protesting, those things, or even toppling down these monuments. You even have the COVID. You have people out there that are demanding schools and stuff to be open, and you're challenging the establishment. You're challenging authority. And sometimes those opinions aren't always popular at first. Sometimes they're met with resistance. Even think about the civil rights movement with MLK. A lot of his ideas weren't popular. He was attacked. His house was bombed. Eventually he'll be killed. But think about that. Think about like how all those opinions and then eventually a lot of those things will lead to change. But sometimes it's always a struggle to get there. And it's kind of what happened in these time in the 1700s, where you had these philosophers and more people began to question this authority. And think about, did the king want to give up power? Heck no, he didn't. So he's gonna meet that opposition and that challenge to really try and crush the people who are speaking out against him. All right, so starting off with the guy named, one of the philosophers, Denis Diderot. A lot of these, back in the day, they would have these thinking parties, meaning that you would read different philosophers, you'd read different ideas, and share your educational knowledge about things. And you would also have a beer at a saloon, and talk about different readings and different philosophies. And at these things, you were taught to teach to think critically and to question things. Put together a collection of writings of major philosophers that will ultimately lead to the encyclopedia. Ultimately, what Denis Diderot's going to do is that he's going to take all of these different philosophers, he's going to create an encyclopedia. So think about how brilliant that is. You take a hodgepodge of all these different people, different ideas, vocabulary terms, places, things, and you put it into one book. And think about, too, what was also going on in the 1600s? Exploration and travel. So you're putting, these famous people and explorers and kings and queens and kind of what you're finding, you're putting it all in one place. It's a one-stop shop. Brilliant. So when these encyclopedias were created, now you mass produce them and then you put them all across the world. More people read them, more people understand. And now knowledge is not just for the rich anymore. It's for everybody who can read. So Denis Diderot's going to be a game changer for spreading, this knowledge to more and more people. Now, other philosophers you're going to need to understand and know. A guy by the name of Thomas Hobbes. How I always think of H. Hobbes hates. He believed that humans were wicked and were selfish and were fearless. He believed that at one point in time there was no rulers, there was no kings, and people lived in a state of lawlessness, and people were not happy about that. Very violent time periods. And he believed that people needed to be ruled and to be controlled to keep the order. So, sorry, my battery's running out. I need to get close to a plug. There we go. I'm good. He believed that life in nature was nasty, brutish, and short. So he wrote this book called Leviathan. It's like an evil sea monster. And this on the front cover, it's what he uses, sea monster, to basically represent human nature. That humans were inherently, deep down inside, were evil. That if we didn't have a ruler, we would do very nasty and awful things. So his solution was to create an absolute monarch. Think about what a monarch is. It's a king. So he believed that the king or queen should have absolute, total control. Well, that's the thing about those governments that were in the 15, 1600s. They were absolute monarchs, absolute kings who had total control and all power. He believed that an absolute monarchy was needed to keep the order, to manage the corrupt behavior of individuals. That democracies wouldn't work because it's by people. People are evil and corrupt. So he believed in an absolute monarchy. Now, what does this term social contract mean? Very, 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 very important vocabulary term. Social contract means that the people voluntarily give up their rights to the king for basically for protection. That you give up your freedoms of absolute freedom to roam as you go and to live in a state of lawlessness. Basically, you've given that up to be ruled, to be controlled. In protection, that king or queen is supposed to provide you security and safety. And now, did that always work that way? No. Sometimes the king or queen would be corrupt and would charge you unfair taxes and this and that. So, but that's the idea, that social contract, that you would voluntarily give up some of your rights to be protected. All right, then you had John Locke. John Locke wrote a book called Two Treatises on Government. That was like his major, writings. And his ultimately big contribution to the Enlightenment was his idea of three natural rights. He believed that, think about Locke loves, LL. Hobbes hates, Locke loves. He believed that every individual had the right of life, liberty, and property. That you have the right to life, to live your life. You have the right of liberty and freedom. And he also believed that each individual had the right to property. So he believed that the governments existed to protect the rights of the people. However, he differed from Hobbes because he believed that a constitutional monarchy, that you can't give kings and queens absolute power, absolute control, that they need to be controlled through a constitution, what they can and can't do, and therefore the people should have certain protections, certain rights from the government. So he rejected the idea of divine right, that God spoke through the king and that kind of thing. But also he differed from Hobbes because he believed that people were good and were well-intentioned. They were born with a blank slate, essentially, and that you learned negative behavior through your environment, through experience, and you were corrupted, essentially. So again, think of Locke loves, Hobbes hates. All right, other important philosophers is Montesquieu, Baron Montesquieu. He wrote Spirit of Laws in the mid-1700s. So he believed again the idea that kings and queens had absorbent of power to do whatever they wanted. So he believed that you can't keep the power in one place; you have to spread it out. So two very important vocabulary terms is separation of powers. He believed that you need to take the power of the government and separate it into three separate branches. Hence, separation of powers. So one is the executive branch. The executive means that you're going to enforce. So the president or a king, but you have some type of single leader. That would be the executive branch. Their job is to enforce the laws. Okay, so who's going to make the laws? So according to our government would be the legislative branch, the Congress, a whole different body, not the president, but Congress. They make the laws. And then third branch of government would be, okay, well, who judges the laws? The judges, the judicial branch. They interpret the laws. So you're taking all those powers that once belonged to the absolute monarch, and now you're splitting them up into three different branches. Now, the other thing that he did is that, okay, well, what happens if one branch becomes more powerful? Oh, how about checks and balances? Basically, you're preventing one branch from becoming too powerful. So, for instance, if Congress makes a law saying that all blondes can't drive, well, guess what? That's unconstitutional. The Supreme Court would rule that as unconstitutional, unfair. So you're putting a check on that. Or the president can veto. So those are all examples of checks and balances, that you're checking the other branches. There we go. Okay, Voltaire. Voltaire believed in freedom of religion and speech. First Amendment, guys. Freedom of speech, religion, petition, assembly. He believed that all individuals had a right to a fair trial. He believed that although he may not agree with what you say, he believed that he'd be willing to die for your right to say it. But he did distrust democracy. He keep information from citizens to keep them weak. But ultimately, he did believe that people should have various religion and speech rights to give their viewpoints. And the last one is Jean Rousseau. He believed that people were born good, but were corrupted by government and the environment. He believed that social contract was necessary, but he also was the foundation of the first democracies, more rule by the people, and kind of getting away from the monarch system. All right, so that is it for lectures for today. Have a good Good day.